the back. The cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mates that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
The turn of the 21st century marked a seismic shift in religio-political discourse, particularly the events which hallmarked the dawn of a new era, the September 11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York.
I know it's not easy to be away from home.
The Anglo-European power structure sought a common enemy. Muslims became the scapegoats. Legitimated by the geopolitical watershed, new atheism took center stage to attempt to counter this enemy.
It's a logical progression that goes from believing in faith, having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers.
New atheism targeted Islam particularly because of 9/11 and the events of 9/11 and the Al-Qaeda group being comprised of Muslims and adherents to Islam, and therefore Islam was targeted because Islam was displayed as the agitator and the inspiration behind terrorism and the events of 9/11. So therefore, New Atheism had to debunk Islam and to dethrone the concept of God as they understand. And by debunking the concept of God as they understood, they were especially targeting the Quran and the prophetic hadith, as well as the Islamic civilization, 1400 years of Islamic civilization.
For want of leadership, this post-Marxist, globalist, anti-theist movement anointed the four horsemen of New Atheism: Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett, who all willingly donned the mantle of punishment from God, rather like Genghis Khan did.
New Atheism was a reaction. You had people like Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, who's a zoologist from Oxford University, and you had Christopher Hitchens and a few other people who were a part of a movement in order to finish religion in a way that they claimed that they were doing this through intellectual arguments. And this movement gathered speed after 9/11. And then a number of books were released, like The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and God Is Not So Great by Christopher Hitchens. And people read these popular paperbacks thinking that this is the depth of religion as displayed by the authors of those books. So this gained momentum in the 2000s, and then through this movement many young people left Islam, left Christianity, left whatever religion they were following, simply because of those fallacies that were presented in those books. They don't only attack Islam, they also attack other religions, but Islam is one of the main focus of the New Atheism because of political reasons. So Christopher Hitchens, for instance, was someone who approved of the invasion of Iraq.
Liberation Act. It shall be the policy of the United States to remove this regime and begin the Middle East again. What's wrong with that? Anyone who wanted to complain should have written to their Democratic senator in '98 and said, "What's this about you promising to remove Saddam?"
To ridicule religion New atheists often resort to disparagement and derision to debunk the concept of God. They attempt to pit science against religion in the minds of their audience by fabricating the fallacy that science is at odds with religion and cannot be understood in a parallel fashion.
I think it's absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And
in its
entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
So atheism, and especially new atheism, associates the belief in a God with stupidity. This is a common misconception that is propagated on popular media as well as popular literature, that anyone who believes in a God or in God is anti-science and anti-common sense. And organized religion is against freedom and is in fact totalitarianism.
In spite of their frequent and futile attempts to deprecate Islam and its adherents, the Four Horsemen possess little knowledge of the religion they are attempting to rebuke. Dawkins, for example, on countless occasions has displayed inadequate knowledge of the fundamental principles in Islam.
Richard Dawkins has not actually read the Quran, so he admits in a tweet that he has not read the Quran. He even spells the word Quran with a K, meaning an old imperial spelling, orientalist spelling of the word Quran. So that's how outdated his arguments actually are. So with regard to what you ask, are they purposely misinforming? I would say that they are very ignorant of much of what they state to be knowledgeable regarding. Richard Dawkins is a produce of his generation, post-war, imperialist, white supremacist, born in Africa but still considers himself superior. A person who has never read the Quran but yet criticizes the Quran, praises the church bells in his hometown, but then describes the Allahu Akbar of the Adhan as being barbaric or whatever term he utilized. An ignorant man who criticizes Islam after having professed the fact that he has never read the Quran.
New atheism sees a stark difference between a belief in God and science. Not just a difference, but manifest incoherence and incompatibility between the two. Science is lauded by new atheists as an attempt to remove the fog from important issues, such as the chemical beginnings of life, while religion is condemned for being a superstitious myth that fills the gaps with creation stories or imaginary God-filling explanations. Have they wondered how Muslims see science?
What we would say scientism, which is basically believing science will give you answers to everything, but science is something that in Islam we have a respectability for science, because science can never contradict our Islamic teachings. But there are those things which go beyond the scope of science. And that is where Islam gives us an ethical code, a moral code, as well as admiration of beauty, music, art. This is beyond the scope of science. So what Islam touches upon is those things which go beyond the scope of science. But New Atheism attempted to furnish the argument that religion and Islam and other religions as well included go against science and are in fact anti-science. The Quran does not contradict empirical fact. So whatever is observed and we know through empirical fact, the Quran does not contradict. This is detailed in the book, as well as the authentic hadith. And sometimes people may misunderstand the actual reading of the hadith. Science is limited in its scope, in the sense that science in Islam is viewed as the fruit of human efforts in the material realm. So the material realm is utilized for our benefits. This is the scope of science. But when it comes to the metaphysical realm, when it comes to those things which cannot be answered through just study of material and cause and effect, like morality and ethics, beauty and art, then that is the domain of something else other than science.
In order to aggravate Islamophobic sentiments, new atheists often resort to attacking the judicial system of Islam. Frequently, however, this is achieved through ad hominem assaults and fallacies as opposed to credible arguments.
The arguments of new atheism are emotionally packed. So many of the arguments are emotional arguments. Rather than starting on epistemology, which is the right inception point for any argument, they move straight to Sharia law, which in my book, the Sharia law is the last chapter. The argument cannot go straight to Sharia law, but because many of them despise certain rulings in Islam, like women wearing hijab, they despise this rule, or the amputation of the hand of a thief by governments, Islamic governments, this is despised. That would be an emotive argument against the existence of God. In reality, that does not disprove God.
One of the greatest talking points in the discourse between Islam and atheism is the Sharia law, a comprehensive legal system which historically governed vast multi-religious and multi-ethnic regions for 1300 years before the formation of modern Arab nationalist states and monarchies. But what exactly is Sharia law?
Unlike other religions, Islam has every aspect of human life, a code for every aspect of human life. So Islam is a way of life. So Sharia law was especially targeted by new atheism because Sharia law was rebrandished as a harsh code of law, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic. All these appellations were given to Sharia law. But as Muslims, we would say Sharia law is the perfect way of life. Now with Sharia law, many of the atheists may be actually misinformed with regard to simple rulings. So what the book does is uncovers where the misinformation is being relayed. So stating simply that a man's hand is amputated for theft is a simplification of a very detailed law. Likewise, mentioning the hijab of a woman is a simplification of public decency laws that Islam has. And this is done with many of the laws in Islam. So this book covers that. Sometimes this misunderstanding, of what some people may term as a misunderstanding, is in fact a propaganda which is given for public consumption. So what I am claiming is that there is a clear propaganda against Islam.
In his best-selling book, Islam Answers Atheism, published by Rigel Publishing, Asrar Rashid meets new atheists and their troop to demystify their strange utopian agenda. Using Kalam epistemology, Rashid tackles the common problem of evil and free will, and in so doing articulates the strong proof for the existence of God.
The name of the book is Islam Answers Atheism, and it's a book, 6 chapters. Each chapter deals with a different segment. Each chapter is, the chain of the chapters is interconnected like a chain, or you could say the book is like a mosaic. The entire book, to appreciate the book, a person needs to read every chapter. So the first chapter, the opening chapter, is to do with kalam, which is the rational theology, the rational basis for which historically how Muslims have encountered heretical sects as well as various philosophies and have been able to demonstrate rational proofs for their beliefs. This is what the first chapter comprises of. The second chapter is regarding epistemology. What is the methodology? So a detailed and thorough discussion on what methodology the Muslims employed in countering any arguments against their religion. And the third chapter is a chapter on the proof for God. The fourth chapter is on the problem of evil, why evil exists, why does God even create evil. Human free will. And other philosophical questions which people pose regarding God and the divine attributes of God. So all the contentions against God are covered in chapter 4. Chapter 5 is a chapter on science, the Muslim or the Islamic position on science, what our position on science is, and then the scientific objections against Islam, or specifically the Quran, where it is claimed that the Quran contradicts science or the Hadith contradict science. All those objections are analyzed, and then a response is given to them. And the sixth and final chapter is a detailed discussion on the historicity of the Quran, the preservation of the Quran, the preservation of the Hadith, and a response to the objections of Orientalists and New Atheism. And the final segment of that chapter is regarding Sharia law. So the objections on Sharia law, women's rights, homophobia, as well as the hudud, the corporal punishments in Islam, anything which is portrayed as being harsh, like jihad. These things are, the objections are mentioned, and then the response to those objections.
As new atheism strengthens its grip on societies around the globe, Muslims are ever facing engagements and confrontations from atheists over their outlook on life and the irrationality, as they see it, in believing in one God. Whether these be in the form of free books and handouts at universities, or nuanced digs at Muslims in the workplace, a strong and robust response is the need of the time.
This book was a response to various engagements with atheists in colleges, universities, in mosques, in churches, on the road, in the parks, in town centers, discussions, informal discussions, formal discussions, debates, sitting with them in cafes, sitting in the front room, in various homes, private homes. These discussions led me to write and formulate a book which compiles all the various objections and a response to those objections, as well as the books, popular books written by Richard Dawkins, his famous book, The God Delusion, and other works also. The various objections are recorded in this book, and the response to those objections is given. The book is primarily focusing on those objections and a response from the Islamic point of view. The book targets non-Muslim atheists, former Muslims, and Muslims who adherents to Islam. So three main groups. Those three main groups are atheists, former Muslims, and people who are Muslim and this would include nominal Muslims or cultural Muslims, but also Christians and peoples of other faith who are interested in Islam and need to know an in-depth knowledge regarding Islam and Sharia law. The objective of the book is to remove any doubts regarding the veracity and truthfulness of Islam, to respond to the atheist objections. So the minimum is that a response is given, and not just any response, not an emotive response, an adequate intellectual, rational response. Thirdly, to equip young Muslims with a response to atheist arguments. Fourthly, to inform the atheists who have been misinformed. And fifthly, to make the arguments and debates between Muslims and atheists more quality controlled and more in-depth in their nature. That's some of the purposes of this book.
And our duty is none other but to plainly convey the message.